We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.
Well, hello and welcome to the Knowledge Share with Dr. Dave podcast. I am Dr. Dave A. Cornelius, aka Dr. Dave. This episode, we're going to talk about we trust you to achieve our goals, which is one of the generative adaptive practice gap tenets. And we're going to talk about that in the context of LPM. We're going to discuss maybe creating a culture of learning from successes and failures to optimize, portfolio performances. And so the strategize LPM adoption step, it helps us to establish that portfolio vision, strategic themes, lean budget guardrails. And this is a crucial step that connects strategy to execution, just setting the direction for the solution or enterprise portfolio. So as we delve into this pivotal LPM adoption step, strategize where the foundation of most portfolio vision themes portfolios are established. We're going to explore also how generative leaders build trust and foster work ownership by integrating we trust you to achieve our goals, one of the gap tenets. We're also going to just look at the habits, some of the human-centric stances of head, heart, habits that generative leaders embody to create. We think of productive portfolios. And we're thinking about strategic thinking and innovation, which is the head, and the people positive mindset, where we're thinking about the heart, and consistent behaviors. We're talking about habits. And these leaders empowers their teams to take ownership and drive success. Right? The goal is to help you, as you listen to this podcast, learn practical insights and real-world example of how trust and collaboration can transform in the portfolio management process. So sometimes I think of a story, and if you could imagine a sous chef, which is an AI who can analyze vast amounts of data and ingredients to predict market trends and suggest innovative recipes, ideas, products. And then you have a leader in the organization who is envisioning these great capabilities for this AI sous chef, right? In a strategic session. They use LPM to define strategic themes where we're like connecting, cooking, and personalized meal planning. And they may even identify how AI could develop more innovative appliances and services to those themes, right? In terms of like describing that. And so the outcome that we're looking for is that there's a clear and focused AI strategy aligning with the vision for intelligent kitchen. So, I'm going to bring on, someone that I've been working with lately, Yuval Uret, who is a safe fellow. And as usual, we always start off with singing or spoken word. And I don't know what Yuval is going to bring for us, but he's going to start us off with something fun. I can't wait.
I don't know. Hi, Dave. I don't know that it's going to be fun, but it's going to be fun for you to watch me break my teeth on it. So let's see how that works. Glad to be here regardless. So I'm actually going to recite from a Hebrew song, an Israeli song, and I'll translate it in a bit. I think it's appropriate for both where we are in time as well as more broadly. So יום שישי הגיע והוא בא בדיוק בזמן, כמה שחיכיתי כבר בעצם למשהו מרגיע, ואם הוא פה אז זה סימן שהלך עוד שבוע בא השקט. Any idea what that was about, Dr. Dave? Just from the feeling, the vibe, or should I go straight into translation?
You should go straight into translation, but what I felt was a happy energy, right? Yeah. And that's what that resonated with me. So let's hear what it sounds like.
So Friday has arrived and it came just in time. As much as I've been waiting actually for something relaxing, and if it's here, then it's a sign. Another week went by and the peace came. So that's the translation of the first. the beginning of the song. It's a song by an Israeli group called the Dag Nachash, which is a great Israeli group. And we're recording on a Friday. This has been a busy week for me with time on the road, travel, crazy travel woes both this week and the last. So it's nice to, have a Friday to regenerate. You're talking
Yes.
about generative leadership. Friday is typically a generative time, especially in, Israeli culture and in Israel. Friday evening is a very special day where everything more or less at this time of the day starts to get relaxed. So it's not a very relaxed time in Israel right now, but I'm sure people are trying, even though, some weird stuff is going on.
Yes. Yes.
So
For
I'm
sure.
thinking of that as well.
So am I. So thank you for sharing that. I think that was really important and impactful for me, and I hope the same for the listeners out there. So I'm going to allow you to introduce yourself because I think you would do a much better job than I would. And so the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. So I would say what I do is I help people leverage agility at scale through coaching, through training. More and more these days, it's through just, being an advisor. And my take on agility is to focus on pragmatic, laser focused interventions. I use SAFe, I use professional Scrum. I'm a trainer in both, but I try to bring the best principles of lean and agility and flow, and that focus typically brings me to the front lines of innovating how to leverage agility, not the usual transformations. So I've spent a lot of the time recently in agility in pharma, agility in biotech, consumer product goods, agility for a company level operating system. How do we work as an organization, being agile about the product being the way the company operates? So this is the space that fascinates me these days.
A lot of heavy stuff, which is great. So let's just jump on in. We have a few questions that I prepare and I sent to you in advance to give us an opportunity to just flow in our conversation. So while you're working with clients and and you're in this LPM Strategize adoption step, which is really important, I want to know, where do you start? Do you start with the vision? Do you start with themes? Do you start with other topics? I know you and I have had conversation about this before, and I would love to hear. I'd love for you to share, your context about that.
Yeah, I think the first question to ask is, do you even start with strategize?
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, there's one take that says, if you don't know where you're going, how useful would it be to do anything else? So you really want to clarify that. The other take is, typically when I meet organizations, and we worked on this in an organization together a couple of months ago, they're already doing something. They're going. It's not that they were bootstrapped the moment we came in. And I find it useful sometimes to just starting with what they have, starting with mapping, visualizing, learning about the flow of work that they already have, and then strategizing and starting to see the connection between strategy and execution, if it even exists. So bottom line, I'm still on the fence on whether to start with strategize or have it as a fast follow to visualizing and managing the work at the portfolio level, but also at all other levels of working on agility. When it comes to the strategize phase itself, what I gravitate towards these days is some form of outcome-oriented goals, be it OKRs or whatever else, that force you to make your strategy explicit. Then once you establish that, you can form this into a vision that is inspiring and use it to rally the people and communicate more broadly. But somehow I feel like starting with what are the outcomes, what are the goals, is just more my cup of tea for how to approach this.
No, and that's what we're asking, right? Because we know there are many different ways to approach this, but your context, I mean, I've seen it work, right? So that's really good. But when we get into the concept of we trust you to achieve our goals, this is one of the tenets that established in the generative adaptive practice. And when we connect that with the strategize step, right? How do we enhance team ownership, accountability? And I'm talking throughout the enterprise, not just the people who are building stuff. I'm talking about the leaders, the sub leaders, on and on, who is participating or just being integrated into this way of working.
So one of the key concepts that guide my work on agility and scaling is the fractal nature of the patterns that we use. Whatever altitude you look at, you can see similar patterns. So the pattern that I really like, let's say at the team level, is we want to trust teams to achieve the goals that we have for the product that we ask them to work on, which implies some collaboration, right? It implies both direction of what's the strategy, what is the strategic goal that we want this team to focus on, but also the team figuring out what can they really do. And for me, that should fine-tune the goal. So what is the actual goal is a collaboration. If we scale that you can scale that to the team of teams, and that's where things like PI planning, are a pattern that is similar to sprint planning in nature, but there are some more elaborate patterns. And you can scale it all the way to the portfolio level. And I think the big room planning, PI planning approach is very useful in the portfolio as well, because you can see portfolio leadership drafting strategic goals, strategic themes, OKRs, whatever you want to call them. And I say drafting, and I do mean they come up with, this is what we would like our goals to be. This is the direction that we want to head to. But how much can we achieve? What can the organization really do? That's a collaboration with the different groups within the portfolio, value streams within the portfolio, whatever you want to call it, where the right set of people from each one of those groups looks at the goals the organization wants to pursue, connect that to their own context and what they would need to do with that in mind. And then they go back and share, this is what we can achieve. This is how this whole picture works together. So think of the act of breakout and integrate in PI planning and bring that magic to the portfolio level, that magic of collaboration, of leadership that is setting the direction, but not forcing the direction, where we listen to people, we engage people in what the journey would be and what realistic but inspiring goals and key results around those goals can be. And by the way, in the upcoming SAFE Summit, this is the topic that I'll be talking about. How do we take this magic of PI planning, that collaborative goal setting, planning, integration exercise, and use it to strategize at the portfolio level?
I wish I could be there. I could only imagine, haven't seen it, haven't experienced it in real life. So I can't wait to hear more from you after it's done. But when you start thinking about your experience with strategic thinking and innovation, how does that help, teams to really flourish when leaders explicitly said, hey, we trust you, and we're going through this process, right? We're trusting you to make sure that we can get to, where we need to go in the process. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
I think one of the values of framing strategy in desired outcomes is that it enables, or it opens the space for innovation. We want to enable innovation in the trenches. We don't want an ivory tower innovation where somebody innovates on behalf of the organization. We want innovation to happen everywhere, and including the people that are closest to the work, closest to the customers. But we want that innovation to be connected to what's important strategically. And there's a trap there, right? There's a trap of telling people what do we need and how to do their work. And if we work that way, this doesn't induce, innovative thinking. This constrains people too much. Focusing on desired outcomes, this is what we want the outcome to be. This is the metric we want to move the needle on. Go figure it out is a very effective mindset, I find.
Okay. So also, as we're talking about leadership at this and their integration in the strategize step, I'm thinking about fostering an environment of trust and empathy that really allows people to have an alignment with the strategic themes. How do you help people get there? How do you support them in that journey?
So when we talk about strategic themes, there's this continuum that we discuss in evidence-based management, from goals and measures that could be about activity. We want to make sure that we work on something. It could be around outputs. We want to measure how much we produce, or have we produced a specific feature or capability. It can be an outcome in terms of our customers, whether those are internal or external, and what could they do different than what they're doing right now. Think of a roadmap capability in an agile tool.
Mm-hmm.
The roadmap capability is an output. The outcome is, as a stakeholder, I can understand where this team or this agile release train is going. I can get a feeling for what to expect. I can start to understand the balance of predictability and optionality. And that's the outcome. And the impact, the last level is the impact. What does that enable? What would be the impact of stakeholders that start to understand the balance of agility and predictability? What does that unlock? It unlocks, working faster. It unlocks trust. It unlocks the ability to be less prescriptive in the way we manage the work. And what I find is that by focusing your goals on outcomes and talking about the impact, why are we focusing on this? That is the way to build empathy for the people that are working towards those goals on their customers, whether those are, again, external or internal, as well as the business needs. Like, where are we going with the business? Why are we focusing on this thing rather than an arbitrary, you need to build this widget by the end of the quarter? So whenever I work with teams on goals and OKRs, I try to push them towards talking outcome. Make sure you refer to the why now. And, when there's a date, it should be a real date. Like, if we're building something for the Paris Olympics, there's a very concrete date that, we need to pay attention to. If we're doing something that needs to be ready for, the federal election day, the date is not going to move, so we need to refer to it. But saying, October 15th, if it's an arbitrary thing that is just used to control and manage a team, let's stay away from that. Let's talk about what's real, so that the people build real empathy and connection to their work.
Now, I love the way how you brought all of that together, right? In terms of empathy and trust around outcomes and just the lens of how leaders, get to engage with people. But let's talk about what consistent behaviors you have encouraged in teams to ensure alignment with the portfolio vision and strategic theme.
So first of all, I encourage leaders, especially people that I believe have the potential. Everybody has the potential,
Yeah.
but can be leaders towards generative leadership in the organization. I encourage them to at least understand the taxonomy and classify their goals in their language and say, this is an outcome-oriented goal. And if it's not, what is it? So not everything needs to be outcome-oriented immediately, but even the act of classifying and looking in the mirror and bringing transparency to what is the language that we use. Are we using key results that are measurable, that are gradable, even if we cannot measure them right now? Even if not everything is measurable, just having that transparency is important. It brings a mirror that gets people to focus on the right things. The next level is to take a look at the work and bring the strategy into the work as often as possible and have it be as present as possible in each and every artifact and event and conversation. One example of that is if you are managing epics in your portfolio Kanban, it would be good to take a look at, it would be useful to take a look at which of these epics connect to your strategy in what way. So think of a swimming lane where, horizontally on your portfolio Kanban, you can see which epics relate to each of your strategies. And that can be a very interesting view because you might see that you are very focused on one strategy, and maybe there's a strategy that is being starved. Even that act of looking at that view is an opportunity to reflect on the strategies and have them in mind. So that's just an example. Looking at the end of each quarter, at the end of each PI, and look at flow distribution. How many epics did we deliver? How many features did we deliver? And how does that connect to our strategies? Look at the KPIs that those strategies relate to and see, have we managed to move the needle on those? So whatever way you can bring to connect those strategies to the day-to-day, whether it is goals at different levels, whether it is whatever visibility you look at, whatever dashboards you use, I find that to be a useful way for leaders to iterate the strategies and what we're doing about them.
So, I like to talk about trust and ownership a lot. It's the thing that, I think many people in the agile space or, in this adaptive space tend to think about. And I think about that with generative leadership. So how do you help leaders to foster trust and ownership, throughout the system as they're building out this LPM practice? Because oftentimes, there are people who are disconnected from the process itself who have no trust in it. How can we trust that? Right. So how do you help them to get there?
So one of the things I often see is leaders that don't really understand what's going on in the trenches, whether it's because of a lack of transparency, lack of information, or too much information, which I would call lack of transparency as well. You can't see the forest for the trees. I've worked with a group recently where they have too many features.
Mm.
There are many managing features at the wrong altitude. They have way too many features, and portfolio leaders don't really understand what's going on in the value chains. Now, they shouldn't necessarily understand all of the nitty-gritty details of what's going on everywhere in the portfolio, and that's part of the coaching conversations that we need to have. What's the altitude at which you feel comfortable trusting your people? What are the sort of guardrails that establish trust? And what are the things you want to pay attention to? But in order for these leaders to use the guardrails and establish trust, they need some level of interaction. So it's both working on transparency, and sometimes that's adding information. Sometimes it's raising the level of the information to avoid seeing too much. And sometimes it's just bringing to the table options for guardrails and asking those people to have a conversation on what guardrails make sense to you. Like, do you have the right people that you trust engaged as business owners in these teams and teams of teams that in your portfolio? If so, does that allow you to take a step back? If your trusted people are there, if your lieutenants are there, okay. Do you trust, a mechanism of a threshold below which decisions can be made in, the agile release train, but above which it will come to your level? When I ask that question, and when leaders can figure out the parameters themselves, they're more likely to trust that system because they were part of creating it. And for me, that's the key point. It takes more time that way. It's not that we bring a recipe to people and tell them this is how it's going to work, this is what you'll see. But that's a worthy investment on time. We bring them patterns, but they get to configure those patterns. They need to make some decisions. It's kind of like I keep referring. I'm thinking now of that story of the brownie mix that the research has shown, and I'm probably butchering that story, you probably know it better, but the research has shown that people, housewives at the time, people preferred to actually do more work with the brownie mix. Like, we could have a brownie mix that doesn't require you to add an egg. There could be egg mix, as part of it, and just add water and it will work. But brownie mix that requires you to do some work, that you make it your own, is something that people connected more to, were prouder of. Like, if it's an IKEA furniture that you assemble, there's a spot in your heart for it. In the same way, we need to find what's the right set of parameters for people to actually own when figuring out their approach towards agility, approach towards the portfolio level. Not too much and not too little. If it's too much, there's a risk that it will take too much time. It won't have the essence. People really need a solution that they can work with. Most people. But if we just tell them what to do and it works out of the box, even if it can actually work out of the box, they might not buy into it. So it might actually make sense to design it for people to customize it, even if the customization is not crucial.
Yeah, no, that's really good, and that kind of like walked right into the question. The final question I was going to ask you about your recommendation for continuous improvement, so we could have integration of trust, strategic thinking, and people positive leadership while we're in the step, and I know we have these 6 steps for the LPM adoption. So as we look at this step, how do you, as a leader out there, guiding people, what kind of recommendation for them to improve?
Yeah. First of all, when I think of these steps, I'm thinking of rugby rather than relay race.
Yeah.
So there would be some strategized work happening in parallel to align, in parallel to improve, in parallel to visualize and manage. It's not that we can get strategized over with or should even try.
Yeah.
But with that in mind, I think once you get a couple of reps going on, strategizing, you can start to use the taxonomy of output to outcome, refer to impact. You can start to build some more quantitative conversations around, your goals. A lot of the time, the first time around, you won't even know how to measure something, and that is okay. Just align on those strategies, and the next time around, you can think about how to measure. The next time around, you can move from measuring using qualitative surveys to something that is more quantitative. You can build a KPI, map that's relevant for your business. You can improve the quality of the conversations around what the goals should be. You can start to manage the amount of goals that you have, and over time reduce the amount of goals that you set to yourself to reinforce flow and stop starting, start finishing. I have this notion of healthy, mature organizations using OKRs should think about OKRs as some sort of Kanban system where you're considering a goal. There's some sort of review and consideration of your goals, but you don't ratify them, immediately. You constantly have conversations around, do we have capacity for this goal? And it becomes some sort of flow system and not just a cadence of goals. So all of these are opportunities to bring more thought into the strategize phase. And maybe most importantly is look at different techniques for the actual strategizing and, try them out. Try the flywheel, try play to win, look at different options for how to think about your strategy and use that to keep it fresh, mix it up, to be creative around what is your focus. A lot of the time we talk about the mechanics, but we forget that the real important piece here is not necessarily how you phrase your goals, but to come up with the right goals.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know what the right goals are. This is why we need agility, but can we improve our process for finding likely candidates for useful strategies?
That's brilliant. That's really brilliant to think of applying a Kanban system for, walking through and really figuring out those different OKRs that you have for that defines your strategies. I like it a lot. Hey, what final word do you want to leave with our listeners or seers?
Final word.
Final words.
Seers and listeners. Word or words. Be agile about agility. And think of fractals, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let me close and just say, hey, thank you for joining us in this episode of the LPM Adoption Step Strategize with the Generative Adaptive Practice. We trust you to achieve our goals, these GAP tenet. And so we've had an opportunity to learn about, the LPM Adoption Step of Strategize and how, when and how we may think about doing our vision, our strategic themes, this just helps us to build that connection between strategy to execution and really just set in that direction, right? In the next episode that's coming up, we're going to really go a little bit deeper and talk about, run the experiment and evaluate the hypothesis. And we're going to connect that to the LPM operate step. Right. And so it's through experimentation. And as we're, going through and working through our portfolio Kanban, we're learning new information. We'll uncover how gap leaders use adaptive practices to harness new ideas with an open mind and really assessing, the potential that's out there. They're not afraid to experiment and take risks. So don't miss out on this insightful conversation. So tune in next time to continue your journey toward building a more value-driven organization. So the Knowledge Share with Dr. Dave podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, Audible, and wherever you get your podcasts. Check out my latest leadership book, Generative Leadership to Thrive, and the incredible story about Ashanti Mwendo series as well. All of those are available on Amazon. So thank you for listening. And remember, the journey to excellence is ongoing, and every step taken with an abundance mindset is a step towards thriving and generative organization. So I want to just say, hey, Yuval, and bring you back on stage and say thank you so much for the time that we spent together at a client and for you being generous enough to come and be in my podcast. Really appreciate that.
My pleasure, Dave. My pleasure, Dr. Dave. It's been
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you for the thought-generating questions.
I figured you would answer it with a breeze, so not a problem, right? All right, my friend. Let me just play our music, and you could hang around, or we could chat some more.
We all have something to share. No share with Dr. Dave.